we go. We are live. I will make you the host.
Oh, good. Now we're going to have some fun.
Now we're going to have some
Now
fun.
we're going to have some fun.
Wonderful. Well, thank you all for joining us. The host.
Oh, good. Now we're going to have some fun.
For whatever reason, YouTube likes to remind me that it's live streaming by bringing it up. So, we have Courtney Weber, author of many books on goddesses and other topics of pagan and witchy interest. But today, she's going to be talking about her latest book on Hekate. And I'm going to let her speak to whether it's Hekate or Hekate, and let her finish her introduction and take it away from here. And please enjoy.
Thank you so much, Lawrence, and thank you to all the Pagan Pride organizers. I know this is, as an event organizer myself, I show incredible gratitude for the labor provided here and know that it is a wonderful service to the community and a great service to people like me. And I just welcome everybody here. My name is Courtney Weber, and I am coming to you from the ancestral lands of the Kayapouya tribe and nation, otherwise known as McMinnville, Oregon, on the west coast of the United States. So I am the author of a number of books: Brigid, History, Mystery, and Magic of the Celtic Goddess; The Morgan, Celtic Goddess of Magic and Might; and most recently, Hekate, Goddess of Witches. I also have a tarot book called Tarot for One, The Art of Reading for Yourself. If my voice sounds familiar, I'm also a co-host of That Witch Life podcast, which releases weekly. We have a really incredible episode coming out tomorrow, and I just want everybody to tune in. It's truly truly life changing for me. I have been practicing witchcraft in one way or another for all of my life, but I really named it and said that's what my spirituality and my path is about 20 years ago, right around 9/11. So it's been a very powerful anniversary year for me. I was raised Christian, technically Catholic. I did 5 years in Catholic school, went through catechism, got confirmed and everything. My dad's family is the Catholic family, and my mom's family is devout Southern Baptist from the foot of the Blue Ridge Mountains of North Carolina. So I was raised with both a very ceremonial Christianity and via Catholicism, and also what I would call a lot of folk spirituality through the Southern Baptist traditions. And like so many of you, this is probably going to sound familiar. When I got into my teenage years, I felt that those religions really weren't speaking to me anymore. I felt there was something more, something tangible I just couldn't quite put my hands on, and I wanted to know more about spirits. I knew spirits were with us, and I knew that these faiths acknowledged these spirits, but nobody was teaching me how to be in deeper communion with them. And I also felt the presence of the divine far more at the ocean than I ever felt in the suburban churches I grew up in. I think other people knew I was a witch before I called myself a witch. People started giving me books on metaphysics and, books on tarot and things like that, and tarot cards, and were coming to me for readings and those things. And then one day I realized that there were a lot of people like me that believed in a much more complex kind of spirituality than what I'd been given. And of course, the politics of the faiths I grew up in absolutely didn't fit what I believed to be morally correct as I got older. So I would call myself a very deity-centered witch. I do a lot of work with the gods. That has had a lot of different manifestations over my journey, as I do think our relationship with higher powers change. And I would now say that my witchcraft is highly influenced by the these spiritualities coming out of Ireland, of traditional Irish indigenous faiths, and also in a lot of folk magic that comes out of the Appalachian region. So I have a combination of those things. It was important to me to write about goddesses, as I felt that these specific goddesses, the Brigid, the Morgan, and Hekate, were having a very had a very strong influence on a lot of modern witches and pagans, but there was also a lot of not quite understanding them or not quite having a good sense of who they were, and was either and you could find quite a bit of information that was very scholarly and academic, and also information that was very came from individuals' journeys. I will also say both of those resources are very important. I think people should be pulling from both. And my goal was always to provide a middle way, drawing from the academic sources and drawing from the actual history that we have about the practices surrounding these goddesses, but then also leaving room for modern day practitioners to involve these deities in their life. So today we're talking about Hekate or Hekate. Lawrence asked me before I got on which is correct. And honestly, both are correct. I use both interchangeably. I don't really think about it. I say it's either one is fine. It's whatever you feel more comfortable with. Some people use one when they're just discussing the goddess and they use the other in ritual and ceremony. That's also fine. I think that's actually I always think there's something that's powerful about using only some specific words or names in ritual or magic. I think that can lend some extra power to the magic, but it comes down to which one is correct. Well, they're both correct. So I will be using both of them in this class, and I hope that it isn't too distracting for people. So let me pull up my PowerPoint, share my screen. There she is. Okay. Also, a little bit of housekeeping as we begin. Please feel free to add your commentary, your thoughts, your questions in the chat. I'm not going to stop because there's just a lot of information. We don't have a lot of time together. So I'm just going to go right through. So make sure you list your questions in the chat as you go along. If you have questions or thoughts that are going toward everyone, make sure that the little drop-down menu says everyone. Otherwise, sometimes it says just to the host, and I might be the only one who can see it. And I'm going to stop a few minutes before the end of our time together and get through as many questions as I can. I also don't think that any question is foolish or ridiculous. So please feel free to ask. Okay, so let's discuss Hekate, goddess of the witches. First of all, I want to talk a little bit about who Hekate was. We primarily talk about Hekate as being a goddess of ancient Greece, which is a period that generally encompasses 1200 BCE to about 500 CE. BCE used to mean BC and CE used to mean AD. So we're talking like a good 3,000 years of worship in ancient Greece alone, but she's actually even older than that. So it's thought that she may have originated in the Minoan civilization, which existed from 2700 BCE to 1100 BCE. So we're talking about a goddess who may be about 5,000 or older years old. So this is a very, very old goddess. And she's not specifically or only Greek. So evidence of Hekate worship has been found in Sicily, Libya, Turkey, Bulgaria, and Syria. Actually, it's the town of Lagina, which is in what is now Turkey, is thought to be home to her most important cultural center and maybe her original cultural center. So she essentially has roots all over the Mediterranean, which is a very, very large, expansive area with a lot of different cultures, different languages, different religious practices. So not only is she a very old goddess, she's also a very diverse goddess. Now, the first writer that we have on record discussing Hekate was a poet who was named Hesiod, and he lived in ancient Greece between 750 and 650 BCE. Okay, so that's about like 2,700 years ago. They're the first writings that we have about her that we can find. And he was writing about Hekate as though she was already quite familiar to not only himself, but to his contemporaries. So we're looking at, she was already an ancient goddess when this ancient poet was writing about her, okay? And the way he wrote about her, she didn't need a whole lot of explanation. She didn't need any introductions. He was writing poetry to this goddess whom he truly, truly loved. And those poems are very, very beautiful. So, okay. But because of him being Greek, and because of the way that the Greeks kept their records, most of what we currently have, I say currently because we are still finding records, we are still finding images, and we're still learning more about these historical peoples all the time. But what we currently know about Hekate largely comes from ancient Greece, which is why we tend to associate her as being an ancient Greek goddess. Just keep in mind, she probably didn't originate in Greece, and she's much, much older than even the ancient Greek culture. So, but if we're trying to get a sense of how she was worshipped and we look to ancient Greece, first it's important to note that the religion of ancient Greece was a real combination of reverence, but also fear for their deities, okay? They didn't really believe that the deities loved them or were there to care for them. They mostly wanted to appease them so the gods would stay away. This is very common to this period of human history in this whole section of the world, including, farther into Western Europe. The gods were not friends. They really weren't parents. They were beings that could bless you if they felt like it, but they could also destroy you. And it was very common for the gods to be enemies as much as they were friends. And so a lot of the religious rites of this period were tied to the cycles of the harvest, of life and death, and all really connected to the very complex identities of the gods that they worship. There were no good gods and there were no bad gods. There were gods who tended to be kinder than others, and there were gods that tended to be crueler than others. But never did these people ever assume that any god would show up just for their welfare. All right. The gods they would have to appease and entreat and just basically hope that the gods would leave them in peace, because you didn't want to tangle with them. And that's part of the reason that these temples are thought to have existed as to be these important centers where the gods could be continually appeased so they wouldn't interfere with the business and affairs of the mortal people. The cults that surrounded these different, and when I say cult, we're not talking like some of what we know as a cult today where somebody was brought in and can't leave. These were basically like small religious sects that kept their information of their practices strictly to themselves and didn't share them. And so we don't know a whole lot about them because the mysteries were kept very, very seriously. And sometimes a priest or priestess breaking the vows of these cults could be sentenced to a very grisly death. And so, very, very little do we know about the specific rites and rituals. But often these different temples will be sacred places where these priests and priestesses could perform rituals and according to these mysteries in order to keep the gods happy. All right. So that asks us, who is Hekate? All right. So she appears in a lot of different forms. In poetry and in other carved images. So she is sometimes a singular character and sometimes a triple-faced collection of women, sometimes with the heads of animals. She was sometimes associated with bulls and was also sometimes described as being bull-headed or bull-faced. When she was depicted as three identical goddesses, the figures were commonly ranged around a pillar, either staring out or standing archaically stiff amid the folds of their robes, or they were standing in a circle, as was the commonality with a lot of different of these deities. They were distinguished by the articles that they held, which often included the torch, a libation bowl, fruit, and often with dogs at their feet. So Hekate was often seen with a torch, a dog, a whip, a key, or a combination of these things. She was frequently associated with ghosts or nightmares, and was sometimes depicted as having serpents coiled around her shoulders. And it is said that when she is summoned, one could not look upon her because they would be destroyed, for she was too terrible to look upon. She was also called the far-seeing lady who brandished fire, or Artemis at the gates. She was said to be a very terrible sight for men to behold. It's not certain whether they're talking to, people who presented as men or they're talking to people of all genders. Also making a point that ancient Greece acknowledged a spectrum of genders, not just the male and female binary. That's an important note to have when we're talking about deities as well. And Hekate's name may have come from the same as Hekatos, which was a masculine version of the name and meant worker from afar. So alternatively, her name may have meant Hekato, which might have meant 100. Okay, so Hekate was believed to be able to bestow the power of prophecy on mortals and facilitate communication between humankind and the divine. She was thought to control the elements, landscape, moon, and stars, and was often displayed alongside other deities. So we don't have a whole lot of information about Hekate through the ancient Greek mythology. Most of what we know comes from the little information we have about the rituals in which she was honored. And it's possible that she was so prevalent that people didn't even think that an explanation was warranted. I'm not comparing her to Santa Claus, okay? But we think about how Santa Claus is so understood in at least American culture that when somebody references Santa Claus, they don't have to explain who he is, right? So it may have been something similar to that Hekate was so well known that she didn't warrant any explanation or any need to document her mythology in every situation, because she was just simply part of the people so much. It's also argued that she was not an Olympian god, meaning the gods that sat on Mount Olympus, but was one who belonged to a more popular folk religion. Again, we think of like Santa Muerte is not a Catholic saint formally, but is certainly adopted as more of like Catholic folk religion. And then even people who wouldn't identify as Catholic may have some kind of relationship or perform rites to Santa Muerte. So, again, I'm not trying to equate them. They're not the same, but it's that same sort of understanding and approach. So it's very likely that the Greeks and then later the Romans, who were very traveled people, did a lot of moving around and trading with other cultures. And at least the Romans did a lot of colonization of other cultures and likely encountered her on their journeys and may have brought her home and then, included her in their own personal rites. And she became kind of part of the local pantheon. So some of the sacred places to Hekate include crossroads. Now, that's not like a four-way intersection, which we often think of as crossroads in the United States. Again, I'm speaking from the United States, and I know that not everybody here is in the United States and may not even be American. So forgive me for referring to a lot of our things. This is just the point of view that I come from. She was known as the goddess of the crossroads, where three roads met, kind of like a fork in the road. And sometimes it was believed that she would appear there in order to teach sorcery and witchcraft to those who sought her. She was also associated with the hecatombs, which were places of ritual and sacrifice where the traditional offering was 100 oxen, which might have fed into her name, being the translation of her name being a 100. She was also associated with city gates, any place that was considered liminal, not within, not without, like a gate would be. It's not in the city, it's not out of the city, but it's a place that you cross over into a city. Just like with the three crossroads, you're not going left, you're not going right yet, you're just in a certain place. And then in more esoteric symbolism or thought, she helped souls navigate crossroads between the world of the living and the underworld that was inhabited by the dead. And it was often thought that without her help, the soul of a deceased person might wander between the worlds for eternity, never finding rest. So Hekate was also considered a queen of such souls. It was also thought that Hekate dwelled near tombs and near the blood of murdered persons. Okay. So, as a goddess of witches, so there were so many ways that I could try to write about Hekate. She takes so many forms and manifests in such divergent ways, but the way that I felt best honored her as I had understood her was acknowledging her as a goddess of witches. And witches, as we all know, are very different and often stick out among their families. Most people, not all, but most people who identify as witches have a story about being different from their family or being the weird one in their community. And Hekate was absolutely this archetype. She was really a quintessential witch in the family. She didn't go along with all the other things her family wanted to do. So, for example, she was also considered a titan, who were like the pre-gods, these great forces of nature. And when the god Zeus overthrew the titans, she didn't stay with her titan family. She helped Zeus, who was also her nephew, overthrow the dominant power. So she was the crazy aunt who was siding with the rebellious child, right? So it was said that after this great battle, when Zeus became the king of the gods, that he gave her gifts, a share of the earth and the unfruitful sea, and that he did her no wrong, nor took anything, giving her the depths of these very scary places, the deep underworld and the depths of the ocean. Two places that's important to note really scared the ancient Greeks. right? So already Hekate is a goddess, a powerful goddess who could be sought for power, and she was in charge of the places that were considered scary. All right. So again, we're starting to think about the ant who can chase the ghosts out of the house, that sort of thing, right? And Hekate just didn't go to live on Olympus, but she lived in a faraway cave, which already evokes the feelings of being kind of the witch in the woods, or the one who moves out into the woods to stay away from society, or in a more contemporary note, the one who leaves the small town and moves to the big city because he or she or they could not deal with the culture in which they grew up. And any more so, that's actually reversing as people are leaving cities and going to small towns. But she also embodies that of like, I'm in touch with the family, but I'm staying far away because these people over here, I just can't with them, but I'm going to go over here and do my own thing. So her mother is sometimes said to be Estrella, who was associated with divination by dreams and the starry sky and falling stars in particular, divination, even astrology, which may lead to a belief in Hekate being an oracular goddess, or rather a prophecy goddess. The rest of her family tree is very complicated, as is many of the ancient Greeks. I go through many of the connections in my book. We don't have time to list them all now. That's all we would do. But she was frequently associated with family members who were deities who were also associated with prophecy. And it's thought that she may have terrified the Olympians. And so Zeus gave her the realms of the land and sea in order to appease her, because even he, the king of the gods, was a little nervous about her. So although Hekate was often described as being a virgin or unmarried, or a maiden, it may be more appropriate to say that it wasn't that she never had intercourse with anyone, is that she just never married anyone. She wasn't listed with a spouse, but she is also sometimes a mother, which does imply that she took lovers on occasion. She was said to be a guardian to newborns and was revered as a great cosmic life force, believed to nurture new life and embody the light of dawn. She was sometimes called Korotrophos, which meant nurse or child nurturer to all living things. Other images of her mirror the great-seated great mother of the Asia Minor. So there is a misnomer that we often see in modern paganism about fertility goddesses, and we're used to seeing them as great goddess figures and very benevolent and very kind. But it's really important to remember that the ancients, the fertility goddess was not this loving, giving mother who was constantly giving things. When we see images on the internet or even in metaphysical stores of fertility goddesses, it's a very female presenting person who's very pregnant and is totally chill. Whereas the ancients wouldn't have necessarily seen her that way, because a fertility goddess could also be barren, right? It was completely tied to the crop circles, the weather patterns, and how much food that the earth would produce or not produce that year. So it was a very fickle goddess, and may even be a very cruel goddess, because it was thought that if the fields didn't produce enough food to feed the community that year, that the fertility goddess was punishing everyone. Okay, so when we say fertility goddess, we're not saying just sweetness and light. This is a very terrifying, very powerful being who could be good, but could also cause immense suffering. Okay, so Hekate was, so you can see Hekate was associated with very important forces, powerful forces, but also very dangerous forces. And yet she was also considered to be very protective. She was a guardian of children. At one image in Lagina, it's thought that Hekate gave a stone replacement to the Titan Koros, who was going to devour the infant Zeus, who was also his son. So she gave her brother a stone and said, "Oh yeah, this is your baby boy," and he ate the stone. And then Zeus was able to, grow up and then defeat his father. Hekate is also said to have shared a very special place with people who struggle with childbearing or whose children died prematurely. Hekate doesn't necessarily rear or raise children, but this may highlight a time in which the role of motherhood was much more fluid. A lot more people died in childbirth and people didn't live to old age. And so a lot of times children were raised by extended family members or, neighbors or other members of the community. So it was very common that the mother figure was not the same person who gave birth to the child. In one example, in the myth of Persephone, which if you don't remember the myth of Persephone or haven't heard it, Persephone is the daughter of the earth goddess Demeter. and she is abducted, or she runs away with, or she gets curious. Pick your version of the myth, and she ends up in Hades, married to the death god, and has to be down there for 3 to 6 months out of the year. And during that period of time, Demeter's on strike. She's not letting any crops grow while she's separated from her daughter. But while Persephone is in this frozen underworld, separated from her mother, it's said that Hekate acted as a foster mother to her and took care of her, made sure she wasn't lonely, helped her with her relationship crisis, whatever role that the young woman needed from the older woman. Hekate fulfills that role. And in some carvings of Hekate, it shows that she is and many myths that you read in the myth books you get from the library or at the bookstore. It's the god Hermes, the psychopomp messenger god, who brings Persephone from the underworld back to unite with Demeter in the springtime. However, it's also in some carvings, it's Hekate who brings Persephone to Hermes. So she has a very important role in bringing the earth back to life after a period of it being dormant. Okay. So it was also that it's in many myths, it said that Hekate helped Demeter find Persephone the first time when Persephone first went missing. All right. She was part of this triform fertility goddess, which we often see as in modern neo-paganism as Maiden Mother Crone. You have a young woman, a middle-aged woman, or a birthing woman, and then an older woman. However, in the Hecate's version of the Triformis, it was more connected to the corn of this trifold goddess. Persephone would have been the green corn, the growing corn. Demeter would have represented the ripe corn ready for harvesting, and Hekate would have represented the harvested crop. Also, when you look at her name meaning 100, that may refer to 100 lunar months of corn growth, which ties her to the cycle, the life cycle of this very important crop. In addition, Hecate's torches were carried around freshly sown fields in order to promote their fertility, and these were likely performed by women of childbearing age. And so again, fertility is not just growth, but also death and decay and regeneration. So it really makes sense as to why Hekate was associated with ghosts as much as she was associated with growth and abundance. Speaking of ghosts, okay, so essentially the Greeks didn't have a really great outlook about the afterlife. There was little hope for joy after you died. So the good things were going to happen to you while you're alive, and after death, you were going to be a ghost forever living in a shadowy underworld. And that wasn't very appealing. Heroes could ascend to realms of glory and joy and go to the Elysian fields, but the common people did not. They would just basically go to this cold, boring, dark, and kind of scary place where they would wander this shadowy experience for eternity. And this place was the place that was ruled by Hades and Persephone, who, again, we already see has a relationship with Hekate. It's said that Hecate's symbol of the whip, which we talked about as she's seen in many reliefs that way, was believed to either control or punish the souls of the deceased. Because of a belief in a morbid afterlife, rites of grief were heavily demonstrated at annual visits to the grave sites. So these visits included sacrifices, which included food, as there was a lot of concern about the dead going hungry. It was thought that hungry, bored, or disrespected ghosts were likely to haunt the living, and so proper appeasement was essential. Ghosts were considered to be a threat to the living, so even a spirit of a beloved family member was thought to bring illness, misfortune, or even death to their living relatives. And so there were very intricate rites enshrined into the culture in order to appease or prevent the dead from returning. And this was part of a daily part of life. So Hekate was believed to be able to control the dead, which meant that she was a protector of the living, keeping the dead away from them, from potentially harmful, restless spirits. And Hekate could also be petitioned to encourage such spirits to cause problems for the living. So you could petition Hekate to get a bored ghost to haunt your competition, or haunt the person who literally ghosted, or your ex-lover who jilted you. And it was also thought that she could guide souls from the realms of death, and in some interpretations could bring them back into life as a new soul. She was sometimes known as Brimo, a very frightening goddess who was attended by a whole specter of ghosts whose appearance inspired great dread. She was said to be able to send forth demons and spirits from the underworld at night, and she served as a messenger spirit between the living and the dead. It was said that on moonless nights, so like the new moon, Hekate could circle the graves on the back of dogs and was often attended by the spirits of people who had died young. So Hekate essentially had control over all the dead, but she was especially connected with the recently deceased or souls who had died untimely, violent, or unnatural deaths, or those who were denied proper burial rites. One of her alternative names, Brimo, as we mentioned, suggests a very furious, disorderly goddess from the depths of the earth, who is also known as the sovereign over the dead, one traditionally known for roaming graveyards with her band of restless ghosts and demons. Okay, so this history with ghosts is not thought to have been part of Hekate's original identity. Writings prior to the 5th century, or otherwise the year 400, describe Hekate as a largely benevolent goddess, maybe a little fickle because fertility goddesses in general are fickle. But it was really after the year 500 that writers began depicting Hekate as, scarier and meaner, malevolent, of ghosts and witchcraft and sorcery who would occasionally harm people, particularly women in childbirth or newborn babies. And the reason for this switch is relatively unclear. It's possible that there were a lot of crappy things happening in the part of the world when these writers were writing about her. World events such as famine or war or natural disasters that shaped Hekate's reputation from benevolent or sinister, or invoked a greater belief in fear of ghosts. It's also possible that through migration and travel, similar goddesses influenced the Greeks' belief of Hekate and shaped her into something that was more scary or dangerous. It's also possible that the writings that survived just simply depicted a different Hekate. My personal opinion is that there may have been some influence from the growth of Christianity. Christianity was growing quite substantially at this period. And it may have been that there was a trend toward people fearing gods of the older religions. Whether or not this was, deliberate on the part of the writers, or it was just simply reflecting a change of attitude at the time, we're never really going to know. But I suspect that the growth of Christianity likely had something to do with her change, but I don't think it was the only one. So one rite to Hekate and the dead included leaving suppers at crossroads, especially, ingredients of which included cakes, garlic, mullet, eggs, cheese, and sprats. Sprats were a kind of fish that spawned at the new moon, who were believed to feed the dead. It was considered very bad luck to consume these foods if you came across them. It was also considered very bad luck to come across someone who was consuming these foods, as it was thought you might actually be seeing a ghost who's eating these foods, or you might be witnessing someone who was possessed by the spirit of the restless dead. So the black dog, one of Hekate's symbols, was associated with her because of the dog's natural scavenger nature. We don't see a lot of that in the United States, of dogs being scavengers, but they are natural scavengers. They eat the dead. We don't see much of that because most of our dogs are well fed and kept off the streets, and so we don't see that. But you also, if you've had a dog, they love to roll in dead things in the backyard. So for this reason, it's considered good. It was considered good to invoke Hekate and her hounds in places believed to be haunted, such as crossroads, for protection against baneful or restless spirits. Okay. So this is an example of a curse tablet. The cemeteries were considered places where it would be really helpful to petition Hekate and the dead to assist with your magic. One, it kind of gave the spirits something to do, so they wouldn't come and haunt you, and also they could be used to curse your enemies. And one such action is to deposit curse tablets with invocations to different deities such as Hermes, Persephone, and Hekate. Basically, letters to the dead asking their assistance in thwarting an enemy or competition. And to our modern sensibilities, they can be considered quite grisly. Let's not put any sort of judgment on how people worked with their gods at that time. Different culture, different beliefs, different practices, different morals. And it's not really fair to impose our modern morals on people from a different era. But even if you decide this isn't really your thing and you don't really want to engage in it. So the translation of that specific curse tablet is as such: let Pherenicus be bound before Hermes Chthonios and Hekate Chthoniia. Chthonios and Chthoniia were titles that linked these gods to an underworld existence. I bind before them Galeni, who is associated with Pherenicus. And just as the lead is held in no esteem as cold, so may Pherenicus and his things be held in no esteem and be cold. And so for the things in which Pherenicus collaborators say and plot concerning me, let Therelasilikos, Onophilas, Philatios, and any other legal advocate of Pherenicus be bound before Hermes Chthonios and Hekate Chthoniia. And I bind the soul and mind and tongue and plans of Pherenicus. Whatever he does and plots concerning me, let all things be contrary for him and for those who plot and act with him. Okay, seriously, they just really want to screw this guy up. But it's thought that Pherenicus was the name of a brothel owner, and the spellcaster may have been also a brothel owner and was trying to annihilate some competition. There may have been a personal slight to really get the Pherenicus, whatever he had done on them, and getting to his business was in primary order. Okay, so likewise, today a lot of people ask me things like, is Hekate a dark goddess? Is Hekate a light goddess? Is Hekate a good goddess? Or is Hekate a bad goddess? And I really strongly encourage us to abandon those kinds of labels when we are working with these specific deities. A lot of that comes from an influence from Christianity. Whether or not you were raised in Christian, the United States or Western culture is highly influenced by this kind of good, bad, right or wrong, and then of course dark and light goddess. The truth is that these goddesses were complicated. All of these deities were complicated, and that I think trying to put them in a box not only limits us, but it also really isn't true to their nature. So, for example, one of Hecate's symbols, as we see in this beautiful picture by Caitlin Abdo, is the dagger, which is thought to have represented her cutting a soul loose from this life. It also may have represented her culling herbs, and these herbs could be medicinal and could heal people, but they could also poison people. So many of Hecate's abilities involved giving life as well as damaging or taking life. Okay. And in some cases, it's thought she might have had some sort of psychopomp abilities, meaning she may have guided souls into specific places. And so the soul, she could have guided them to a place of peace. She also could have guided them to a place of torment. And it's really not, so I don't want people to fear Hekate, but I do want people to respect Hekate. And part of the respect is acknowledging all aspects of Hekate and not just picking the aspects that we like and ignoring the ones that might be more uncomfortable. And that goes both ways. For a long time in neo-pagan culture, there was this real adherence to things being about positivity and goodness and happiness and joy, and anything that wasn't was sloughed off the side or ignored. And one of the things we talk about now is toxic positivity, and that's really not reflective of humanity's experience. And it's really not good for healing process. It's not good for growth to just focus on the bright, happy, light, fluffy stuff. At the same time, I see that the pendulum has kind of swung the other way. And especially if you're looking on Instagram or, even when you go to different gatherings, there's now just this kind of culture of what some people call dark fluff. And it has to be dark, and it has to be spooky, and it has to be scary, and it has to be harsh. and without actually, reflecting on the place of that kind of existence in that kind of aesthetic, whatever you call it, in human experience. The truth is, all of our experiences are a combination of both, and I think we need to leave room for all the kinds of experiences and not stick too hard to one and brush the other away, because adherence to things that are dark just for the sake of them being dark and spooky is just as shallow as sticking to things that are only light and happy. So I just really encourage people to be very flexible and open to all of these. And Hekate embodies all of these things. She embodies things that are beautiful and comfortable, but she also embodies things that are scary and and that might be creepy or definitely uncomfortable. But I feel like one of the things that she really offers is through, I'm going to skip some of this stuff because we just don't have time, is in addition to being the light bringer, she's also a key keeper, right? And so she can open doors to, keys are a really important part of her imagery, which indicates her being a protector as much as an opener. And it's often thought that there were a lot of dangers that were close to the city gates. And then also the role of the key keeper is very much a community support role. So in Bronze Age Greece, which is about 3000 to about 1000 BCE, temples weren't just places of worship, but they were also communal food storage places. So the keeper of the keys not only opened the door for religious rites, they also opened the door for people to be able to eat. As part of Hekate's cults, there was a grand rite that was dedicated. It was called the Procession of the Key, which is a major element in a larger festival known as Hekatesia, for which very little information is known. But from what we do know, this procession was led by eunuch priests and a priestess who would carry the key, which was meant to symbolize Hekate. And this role was a position of great honor and was most often filled by a daughter of a priestess of Hekate. And these keys, the key in these rites may have represented purification, either for those who participated in these rites or were performed with the intention of purifying the land. So gates and doorways of temples mark the boundaries between sacred and non-sacred space, between private and public, clean and polluted, and crossing such a boundary might have required rites of purification or else were purification in their own right. And the key, again, was thought to open the realms between the living and the dead. So prophetic messages could be that these could also open the door to prophetic messages accessed by the Sibyl, who was an oracular priestess. And these may have, the symbol of this key may have represented transitions, whether this was a young person going into marriage, or it also represented her transitioning from 1 month represented her being a guardian of the transition of the month from 1 month to the next. So, and also I don't have a slide for this, but one of her major roles is that of the torch bearer. So she's one who often would bring light into darkness again. So she's not light, she's not only darkness, but she manages to exist as a combination of those. And she really, really blesses these liminal spaces, which are not one or the other. So again, I want to bring that back to when we try to put her in a box as either this goddess or that goddess is really not true to her nature, because she absolutely stood in a place where things were both or neither, right? So some modern devotions to Hekate, if you want to begin a relationship with her. The ancient Greeks left monthly food offerings, so that's a great way to do it. I know a lot of people that work with Hekate now offer foods that grow beneath the soil, onions, garlic, etc. Many people offer her wine or other booze. That's not necessary, especially if sobriety is part of your part of your path or your practice. You don't have to offer her booze. Pomegranate juice is also quite lovely, and that is also connected to Persephone, so it would be would be appropriate to that mythology. But I also encourage people to collect trash, to sing songs, recite poems. We have a lot of natural spaces and sacred spaces get damaged unwittingly by pagan offerings. animals can get hurt by food offerings. Even if you leave foods if you're going to leave foods out in a natural space for an animal, make sure they're foods that are not going to hurt the animals. So fruit and nuts are generally okay, but meat can spoil and can make animals sick. Chocolate, absolutely not okay for dogs. And then if you're going to leave it out, make sure you're not leaving it too close to a road, because that will attract animals, which can get hit by cars. That could also be dangerous to human beings. And we just want to be protecting our animal population. So giving service is a really great way to honor Hekate. Cleaning a natural space, maybe cleaning near a crossroads, great way to honor Hekate. Or write a poem and recite it, draw a picture of her and have that displayed somewhere. The gods love seeing themselves in artwork, believe me. But also, cleansing what is no longer useful. If you're someone who uses floor washes as part of your spiritual hygiene and you do a floor wash, offer that dirty water to Hekate. That may seem strange, but the ancient Greeks believed she loved that kind of stuff. So if you were to throw some of that dirty water out, as long as there's nothing in the water that would contaminate a water source, like you're, basically maybe just some salt water or using boiling some local plants and throwing that out there, that's all fine. Just be careful with soaps or other oils or things that would be contaminating to a water source. Throwing that out is something that she would absolutely love. So, and then also just ask her. Maybe she wants garlic and onions from me, but she's going to want something different from you, right? She's coming to you and you're a different person with different resources and different offerings. And she may have something from you that she has no interest in from me. And that's great. And that's a beautiful way to build that bond. So, if you'd like to keep in touch with me, let me see if I have any, oops, that's the end. Okay. My website is CourtneyAWeber.com. I try to keep it updated. I'm not great about that, but I'm working on it. And you can also join my newsletter there. So we can keep you posted as to things I'm doing. I am co-hosting a conference on October 16th and 17th. It is a virtual conference. Join us from anywhere. And it's all about living as a witch in today's world. It's called So Mote That Con. I will be teaching a class on Hekate, but there's a lot of other wonderful speakers who will be present, talking about everything from working with land spirits to working with fairies to working with Catholic saints, reincarnation, home magic, and then we have a special Q&A with Amy Cesari of the Coloring Book of Shadows. So that's being hosted by me and my podcast co-hosts. And while you're at that, please check out my podcast, That Witch Life, which is posted every Monday wherever you get your podcasts or at thatwitchlife.com. My book is called Hekate, Goddess of Witches. And it is available wherever you get your books, as well as my other 3 books on Bridget the Morgan and reading tarot for yourself. I'm on Instagram and Twitter, and I spend a lot of time there. I don't do a lot with Facebook. But other than that, you can, find me in all of those places. So I'm going to stop the share and I'm going to come to, it's time to answer some questions. So for those who aren't familiar, what is a psychopomp? A psychopomp is a kind of guardian spirit who can help souls transition from the living to the dead and back. The psychopomps are believed to travel between the worlds and are really essential in giving, helping souls to get to the places where they need to go. So you could say that the Grim Reaper might be considered some kind of psychopomp, although maybe not, because he doesn't bring anybody back.
It's kind of a one-way trip.
Pardon?
Kind of a one-way trip.
He's a one-way trip. He's one way out of town. Yeah. So I would love to hear from you. Would love to hear questions or insights you have. And meanwhile, I'm going to put some resources in the chat here. So hopefully you can join me for my upcoming conference or anything else we have coming up. So Mote That Con virtual conference 10/16 and 10/17.
In the meantime, does anyone else have any questions? This is a really unique opportunity to be pretty much one-on-one with Courtney and ask her about all of the things that she's worked on and the knowledge that she's gained over many years of study.
Brianne asked if there's a standard pronunciation of her name. I feel like the most common ones are either Hekate or Hekate. And as we mentioned in the beginning, both are fine. I've heard sometimes Hekate and Hekat. Um, I haven't heard that very often, and so I don't know how correct those are, but I know you could use either Hekate or Hekate, and they're both fine. It's okay. We're busy people. You're welcome. And again, all right, I'm gonna put my stuff in here. IG, TikTok. I've got to get back. I've took a little TikTok break, but I also am on there as well.
You really, really need to see her do the online tarot readings, the sort of after effect, because they are so true, so adorable, so entertaining.
Yeah, I got a couple more. I'm working on finishing up a manuscript right now. As soon as that's out, I'm going to go back to TikTok creation. I just needed to. There's only so many things we can do. We have a full-time job, and I basically spend 40 extra hours a week on a podcast. So, yeah.
Awesome. I am going to copy this and drop it in the YouTube as well.
Yes.
Any
other thoughts people had? I know I threw a lot of information at you, but would love to hear about some of your perspective on Hekate and what calls you to her. And I think it's okay. People want to turn off their mute if they're able to. And
yes, please unmute yourselves if you'd like.
Feel free to share. We've got a couple minutes left. Let's chat.
Hi, Courtney. My name is Elwyn.
Hi, Elwyn.
Hi. It's nice to be part of this today. It seems to me to be somewhat rare to really talk to people that have an in-depth knowledge of Hekate. And for me, I think mine started when I think I remember being part of my life from very early age. And how she addressed and I connected with her was not through that name, but that connection with her, there's so much scope to it, and it's really hard to be able to tell people that it's all about the gray. It's all about the things in between, So I guess my question is how often do you find that people have lifetime relationships with her?
That's such a good question. I think different gods come to us in different seasons primarily, but and I think even if somebody has a lifelong relationship with her, that relationship changes shape a lot, and they may find that there are certain periods of their life when they spend a lot of time doing devotions and they're super tight with her, and then there are times when they just don't connect with her as much. I think about this with my cousin or with really, really long time friends. And I'm not trying to equate God relationships as friendships or, even that you would have with a cousin. But if you think about it, I have some friends that I may go for years and not speak to them, but pick up the phone and it's like no time has passed. I hope everybody has that relationship in their life. And same thing with my cousin. We will go for years and not speak. And as soon as we get together, pick up right where we left off. And so I find that people may have that relationship with these deities, and that even if they make a pledge to life with Hekate, they may not be in connection with her every day of their life for their whole life. I don't know if that answers your question specifically. I guess it's because it's so subjective to people. It's hard for me to say I know a lot of people that have been with them her whole life. It's that I may know someone who connected deeply with Hekate, did a dedication to her when they're 20. By the time they're 40, they still have an altar, but they're working extensively in other practices, but they might check in periodically, go over, light the candles, say the prayers, that kind of thing. It's really I think it would be unusual. Maybe this answers your question. I think it'd be unusual to find someone who makes a dedication to Hekate when they're 21 and when they're 80 is still has the exact same relationship with her that they did at 21. So We have just a couple of minutes left, and so if there's another quick question I can answer before we let you all go, happy to do so. Okay. Well, I just want to say thank you all so much for coming. And again, Lawrence, thank you for moderating and all
Of
of your
course.
work in making this lovely festival happen. I look forward to the day when we can all be in person. Oh, the name of the podcast is That Witch Life. We're available. Oh, sorry, I'm putting that sending it directly to Lawrence. My podcast is That Witch Life. We have the guest that is we're new every Monday. We just released an episode with Morgan Daimler talking about the fairies, and also with Najad Lightfoot talking about fall equinox and home magic. And on Monday, we're releasing an episode with an interview with Barry Webster Sr. of Res Squatching Research, who's talking about the culture and tradition around Chitonga, who is often known as Bigfoot. So a very powerful, powerful interview. I'm wanting everybody to hear that just so that we have a better understanding of this being and its relationship to Turtle Island, where a lot of us live. So, yeah. Thank you, Jeff. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, everyone who was here today. And thanks for your great questions, Elwyn and everybody else. Please stay in touch and please pick up my book. Here it is. Look at this. It's so pretty. Oh, thank you, Crystal. Glad you like it. That's fun. So, all right.
You.
Be well, everyone.
Be well. We'll see you all in the next session. Thank you.
I'm going to make you the host. Do I need to make you the host again?
You can.
All right. There we go.
All right.